The first is to think differently about creativity. How can we think differently? How can I help you think differently about creativity than you have been thinking to date? And the second is how, based on this new way I can potentially, hopefully help you think differently about creativity, how then can this help improve your well-being and health and your leadership? So the agenda today, we're gonna learn how to annotate. I don't know if any of you have annotated. I see some of you. Lovely to see some of you from my class, Jeremy and Leah, for example. Lovely to see you. And we're gonna get a little intro into creativity. I'm gonna talk to you about what I think is the most destructive myth, in my view, about creativity. The story we tell ourselves about creativity that has no scientific basis and is not true. And then how we can help you overcome that. And the second story, I think, which is completely baseless and not true, that we tell ourselves about creativity that holds us back. And I'm going to give you homework too. So if you can annotate. So if you could just raise your hand instead in the participants. So in the participant, everybody has the ability to check yes or no in the participants. Yes, Bridget?
Yes.
Wonderful. So if you could just answer this question by clicking yes or no in your participants tab, just so I can get a sense of, is creativity relevant to your job or role? And by role, I mean some of you are students. So do you think of creativity as being relevant to your role as a student? So we have some no's. We have a large number of you saying yes. So if you could chat, what are some of the reasons why creativity is or is not relevant to your work? If you could chat why creativity is or is not relevant to your work. So some of you are saying creativity is relevant to problem solving. Ramin, you're saying creativity is relevant to programming events for the student body. And Eric, hi Eric, good to see you. It's relevant to help differentiate what I am offering to my customer. So it's differentiation, coming up with new ideas for marketing classes. So many of you talk about creativity being part of how you, the work itself, right? That it's something that's integral to the work itself. And I hear this a lot from many different domains. So right now, for example, I'm working with the US Army. And if you talk to people in infantry, if you talk to people who are in aviation and all these different domains, it's actually rare to find somebody that says, creativity is not relevant to my job at all, for all the reasons that you're saying, getting a competitive edge. The role the student requires is adaptability and flexibility. So my question though is, we use this term. What does it mean to you? If you could chat, what are some of the things you think of when someone like me says creativity? So Emily, you have this notion of expressing yourself, thinking outside the box, being artistic. I like this, Tom. Answers you don't find in the textbook. That's right, being unique. Okay, formulating new ideas, imaginative. So you'll notice that there's two different kinds of definitions operating here. The one has to do with what goes on in people's heads, right? Thinking, imagination, and the second really has to do with something that's like a product outside of what a person does. It could be a creation itself, right? It could be an invention. So this is very consistent with kind of how my field thinks about it. And I want to know also, now that we've kind of defined it, and I think this is a very reasonable way to go about defining creativity, thinking different. Are you a creative person? Now, we can't annotate. So instead of the scale, unfortunately, we can't use the scale. If you could again use the yes or no to answer the question, are you a creative person? Green for yes, red for no. Wonderful. We have a lot of greens. This is fabulous. But not all greens. We have 37 out of Bridget. How many total people? 73? Is that right?
Yes, 73.
73. So, actually, when you think about the percentage of people who are saying they're very creative, it's kind of interesting that many people are either saying they're not creative or not answering the question. Maybe you don't know the answer. Maybe you don't know if you're creative. And so one of the most destructive myths about creativity that I have seen that has no scientific basis is this notion that creativity happens when you are a genius. It's not something that happens in ordinary life. It's not something that happens day to day. And here's an example, of course, of the kind of person we associate with creativity, right? And Einstein. There's a product, it was universally agreed as creative, as something that involved thinking outside the box, right? And what I want to suggest to you is for those of you who didn't answer the question, or maybe said no, I'm sorry, but science disagrees with you. Or rather, science have a very specific perspective on this question. And what we know, and this is not an exaggeration, thousands of scientific studies show that if you give any person with a basic kind of cognitive ability to do the basic functions we all do in everyday life, and you put them in a situation that encourages creativity, they will generate something that another person will view as at least moderately, if not more creative than another person who is not put in a situation that encourages creativity. And we know this from laboratory studies. We know this from field studies. There have been 30 years of work on this. And I'm here to tell you that every single person in this meeting today can be creative in a way that enhances your health and your leadership. So now that you can be creative, now that we know this, and now all of you have said, creativity, I want to define it here for us today is perspective change. So changing how you think. And I want to differentiate from innovation, which is really using the change. So if you can change how you think, right, you can come up with a new class for marketing, for example, but does that idea actually make it into what you do in the classroom? That would be innovation, that second part of using the change. And today we're kind of going to be talking a little bit about the blurry line between these two things, because sometimes changing how we think does effectively allow us to use the change. But perspectives are sticky, right? What we believe are sticky. Why are perspectives sticky? Have any of you felt this? It can be difficult to change perspectives. And what are the things that contribute to that? What are the things in our everyday lives that make it harder for us to change how we think? Now, I like Eric, you say progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. Very true. And so, Nick, you're talking about more of culture, so those who surround us. So there are norms and rules about how we should behave. I am a little concerned about social media. We thought social media was going to be this platform where we could get different perspectives, but the engagement algorithms, what they do is they further polarize our perspectives towards extreme views of something that we began believing in the first place. So it turns out that it's making it harder for us to change our perspectives because our perspectives via social media, via all these algorithms and all of these different news aggregators are starting to shift our perspectives in extreme directions. That's right. And so people can also resist change. That's right, Aubrey. People can definitely resist change. So all these reasons you all know, perspectives are sticky. Changing your mind isn't so easy. Sometimes it is, right? If I gave you a creative exercise and said, okay, come up with all these unusual uses for a brick, you could do that beautifully. But if I said, okay, now create a company where you're going to implement this and you have to, by the way, use your own money to fund it, all of a sudden, creativity gets really hard because now there's a risk. Now you don't know if your crazy new idea that was so fun to generate is actually going to be a solution that works, right? And this is the realm of creativity that we all live in. But I want to give you a sense of this feeling of how hard it is to change your perspectives. I'm going to do it by assigning you to a breakout room. Now, welcome back, everyone, from your breakout rooms. So if you could go ahead and chat, how was it? Was it easy? Was it hard to do? What happened? We know there's a lot of research that shows if you vent, what happens is your immune system actually goes down. It makes you more likely to be vulnerable to catching a cold, for example. Generally, you feel horrible when you vent, after you vent. But there's no evidence that venting helps you. But positive reframing is thinking outside your normal negative box, right? There's something, and we're used to holding on to our negative feelings about things. But when we find something positive about that same thing, it can at first be hard because you're used to the safety of seeing something in a negative way. But you also have now this shift that you've experienced. And that shift, that positive reframing, is less likely to make you feel negative at the end, but also more likely to enhance your immune response. You're welcome. Those of you who engaged in this exercise and felt that feeling of maybe a little less heaviness, you have actually decreased your likelihood of getting sick. So congratulations to all of you who engaged in this exercise, and I apologize for those of you who I wasn't able to assign a breakout room, but stuck with us anyways. You just engaged in creative thinking. This exercise is one small example of creative thinking. And scientific research, like I mentioned before, shows that it decreases depression, increases immune response, enhances well-being, and also helps promote proactive problem solving. And I can give you all the citations. I didn't include them here. But if any of you would like these citations, I'm happy to provide them. So scientific evidence is creative thinking can help us. And it's not about generating some idea because you're a genius. It's about simply changing how we think and using these changes to help us achieve the goals that we have. The second most destructive myth about creativity, in my view, is this belief that creativity only happens when we generate this brilliant idea. That's simply not true. Creativity happens even more frequently than that. What we find is recognizing an idea as creative requires that you have a creative insight to find value in it. When I give you the example, you'll understand exactly what I mean. So an example here, this was an analogy that changed the banking industry. And when managers in banking first heard this analogy, they thought, what are you talking about? The analogy is a bank is like a supermarket. And at the time that managers were considering this analogy, the banking industry was pretty much, you had your checking account, right? It was very much about very focused on these single kinds of transactions related to it. And so when someone says a bank is like a supermarket, you may think that's not true at all. Banks deal with money, supermarkets deal with food, right? But when you look a layer deeper, when you actually try to have the creative insight that the person had when they generated this idea in the first place, to understand it, to evaluate it, you have to realize that supermarkets have certain structures, right? Supermarkets, they have groceries, they have pharmacies, they have butchers, they have, all these different parts, all these different services in many cases, sometimes even banking now, pet food. And the analogy was that just like supermarket can have all these different aspects for customers to buy, so can banks. Banks can have checkings and savings and loans and 401ks and all these different services that they can offer to their customers, just like supermarkets. But when managers first saw this analogy, many of them said, I don't get it. No, this is stupid. Why would a bank be like a supermarket? And the reason why they didn't get it is because they didn't have an insight that allowed them to understand the idea. And what this means is something really critical for you, every single person in this meeting. We can reject other people's ideas because we can't think differently enough to understand and get the initial insight that idea involves. We're so focused on and stuck in our habits and the people around us and all those things we talked about before that help us get stuck or make us get stuck. We're stuck. And so we can't see this unconventional connection that another person is trying to communicate with us. And what we believe is this is one of the reasons why, as leaders, as people who predominantly spend a lot of our time listening to other people's ideas and determining if they're the ones you want to bet on or use, right? This turns out to be one of the reasons why we see organizations not using creative ideas, because people in them think that the way you make a decision about an idea is, oh, it's got to have the metrics, it's got to look good. And the reality is that you have to have a creative insight to even understand it. And if you don't, you're going to reject it. But there's also another reason why people can reject creative ideas. So if you could, please, on participants, click yes, green for yes or no. Tell me if you hate creativity. Yes, I hate creativity would be green. No, I do not creativity would be red. Do you hate creativity? We have a lot of reds. No greens. We'll see. We'll see if you hate creativity or not. Let me ask another question. Was your creative idea you had, rejected by somebody else? Green for yes, red for no. If you've had this happen to you, your creative idea was rejected by somebody else. So we have significantly more yeses than nos. We have, as far as I can tell, the yes and the yeses are climbing. So we have 17 yeses and 5 nos. So, okay, many of you have had this experience. 17 of you have had the experience of your creative idea being rejected. So let's unpack this. Why is this that none of us say we hate creativity, and yet it's so common for us to experience others rejecting our ideas? So one of the things that I've been working on and been really passionate about, and one of the things I find very frustrating, and maybe you do too, is I don't see as much creativity in the world as I would like, as I think the world needs to better function. I just don't. I don't see organizations engaging in the kinds of new changes that their customers need, that their employees need, that other stakeholders need. And we've even conducted studies to find that when people are in these managerial roles, leadership roles, where they're responsible and accountable for making decisions, it's almost like they change their entire rubric of what they view as valuable, and it shifts to whatever can show a profit, whatever is viable, what my boss wants. And as a result, we find that when managers are in that role, they say no to ideas that customers say yes to more often than not. And there are lots of examples of leaders in all different kinds of scenarios rejecting creative ideas. Star Wars is a famous one. In the 1970s, it was rejected by United Artists, Universal, and ironically enough, Disney, that now holds the right to Star Wars and is a big moneymaker for it. So ideas can be rejected. Maybe people aren't sitting down and trying to understand them, but there's another barrier that also contributes to the problem. And my lab and I wanted to figure out what it was. So we conducted a study. And in this study, we randomly assigned people to one of two groups. The first group, we asked the question, or asked them to write a statement in response to, for every problem, there are multiple solutions. And in the second condition, we asked people to write a short essay in response to the following. For every problem, there is one correct solution. So we randomly assigned them to one of these two conditions. We did this study with undergraduates at a liberal arts institution, and we asked people, okay, after they did this exercise, how much do you love creativity? Similar to what I just asked you just now. And we asked them just to tell us, is creativity valuable? But we were also sneaky. We gave them what's called a reaction time test. Raise your hands, yes, if you've heard of the implicit attitude test. How many of you have heard, Nicole, you've heard of it? Okay, so some of you have heard of it. Caitlin, Alexandra, you've heard of it. Okay, so I'll go into it a little bit of detail. The implicit attitude test is something that's typically used when we study racial bias. And it's supposed to overcome concerns about social desirability. That is, the fact that when people take tests or inventories, they want to respond in ways they view that are socially desirable. That will reflect well on them. And this kind of a test asks you to pair words. In the case that we were using it, we asked them to pair words around creativity with words like rainbow, sunshine, cake, or heaven, or creativity and words like agony, hell, ugly, and vomit. Okay, we wanted to see were the positive pairings with creativity faster than the negative pairings. And the idea was the faster you pair positive, the more you feel this attitude that's positive towards creativity, assuming also the slower you pair the negative words with words like creativity. So fast response times means higher association, slower response time means lower association between two things, in this case, creativity and positive words and or negative. So we gave this test, right? We assigned them to one of two conditions. We asked them how they felt about creativity, and then we gave them this reaction time test. What did we find? It will not surprise you to know that every student, I think about 98% of the sample said they valued creativity explicitly, just like we all did here. No one said we hated creativity, right? And we found that the students who were in the condition for every problem, there are multiple solutions, their reaction time tests also agreed with that, meaning that they found that creativity was more likely to be associated with words like heaven and peace and cake. But for the participants who were in the condition, who wrote an essay in response to the statement, for every problem there is one correct solution, they associated, they told us they loved creativity, but they associated the word creativity with words like vomit. So my point is to say that it's not only just that we can sometimes not get it, not understand ideas. Sometimes we're in situations where we need to be correct. We have multiple choice tests. We are wanting to impress our boss. We are wanting to have the right answer. We are wanting to show we know what we're talking about. And in these situations, we can have these bias. It's hidden. It's not like you're going to know it, that you have it. It can be automatic. It's based on these situations. And my point is, my dear friends, we all have it. You, me, Bridget, we all have it. I tell the story often of teaching in the USD classroom where I'm teaching a class on creativity and I'm, being the expert, right? Because I'm supposed to be the expert on creativity. I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about. And the task was for students to generate a number of unusual uses to a cardboard box. And in the course of doing so, one of the students generated an idea they were so excited about that they raised their hand. They said, Professor Mueller, can we start? Can we tell you our idea? And I said, sure. And they said it was a solar oven. And I looked at the solar oven, and what I found was something that was totally bizarre. My mouth opened, and it said, a solar oven, what is that? Does that even exist? Is that a thing? And I said it not only in that way, but with the tone I just described. And the student who was standing up in front of all their peers to say this was kind of taken aback that I was immediately so critical of this idea, and calmly said, well, actually, it is something that exists. It's commonly used in India to help heat food, and we thought it was a great idea. And I realized in that moment that something had happened to me. I was supposed to be the expert. I was supposed to know the answer. And a student came up with something that made me feel uncertain. And I wanted to avoid that feeling. And it was a knee-jerk reaction. It was something that was hidden. I mean, I'm highly open to creativity. I've devoted my life to studying creativity. How could I be biased against creativity? I wrote the paper on bias against creativity, but I also exhibited it. And when I exhibited it and I thought about it, I thought, oh, the good news is you can reflect on it. And later I called the student, I said, you know what, that was a really good idea. I must have exhibited the bias against creativity. And we had a laugh about it. So my point is to say that creativity, when we are in these roles, when we're accountable, we have to be correct, can create for us this feeling of ick. We want to avoid them. The more novel an idea, the more uncertainty exists about, is that idea viable, feasible? Will it solve the problem I need? And right now, boy, do we need creativity more than ever. You just told me yourself after this exercise how nice it was to positively reframe something after consistently thinking about it in one habitual way. And we feel this ick because we can be unprepared. We want to be correct. We want to know the answer. We don't want to say, I don't know. And we're worried, in my case as a professor, of losing the perception that I have expertise. And so my point is, we not only reject ideas, we might not understand them, but also we reject ideas because of how they make us feel. So my point to you today, anyone, you, me, can be biased against creativity, even if we love it, even if we're open to experience, and especially when we want to be correct. And if you're in a leadership role, you might want to be correct more so because you have more accountability to be correct, right? Your job, your evaluation, your livelihood might depend on your being correct. And so I have some homework for you. And it's related to the exercise we did in the breakout rooms. When someone pitches you an idea, when you hear an idea, when you look at some new kind of proposal, regardless of the context, it could be in work, it could be in your personal life, it could be at school, it could be in your family. What I'd like you to do is the exercise you just did, positive reframing. Because what might happen is the first instinct is to say, that's horrible, that's a horrible idea, especially if it's new. And the more new it is, the more likely you might feel that way, right? Well, what I'd like you to do is the same kind of positive reframing exercise. Identify the positives in the idea, even if you hate it. And you might need to build in reflection time to overcome that ick, because that ick response can sometimes be really powerful and we just need some distance from it. And what I see is that I'm currently conducting some research in the US Army. I'm talking to leaders who are currently working very hard to keep all of us safe. And one of the things that they struggle with is the fact that the Army, as it was built in the 80s and 90s, was built to develop readiness, practices that they could put in place, practices that were standard practices, that were standard operating procedure. But as a result, it became very, very hard then to come at something and change these practices, because so much of the Army had been built on knowing what you're going to do and planning what you're going to do when in massive coordination efforts. And so what's happened is that the Army brought me in because they said, you know, we need to be correct, and our version of correct is what we did before, but it's getting in our way. Can you help us figure out how to help leaders move people in new directions? And what I learned in part was this: when leaders were working with subordinates, predominantly how leaders engage with creativity is they heard an idea from a subordinate would come to them. But invariably, it wasn't that these leaders would just give an up or out decision for an idea. Usually, the leaders exhibited creativity by adding to the subordinate's idea, by figuring out how to improve it, by figuring out how to maybe pitch it up the hierarchy. But the one thing that leaders said they did consistently, and the leaders who were especially innovative said they did, was no matter what, they said they found something good about the idea. No matter what. They said two things happened when they did that. The first thing that happened was the follower would come to them again with other ideas, because if you shut down your subordinate's idea, they're not going to come to you again. But the second thing that happened was they started to think of new ways they could improve the idea, or actually how the idea was beneficial. When initially, their initial reaction was, no, it probably wouldn't work. You probably wouldn't want to use this idea. And research has since corroborated that thinking about the positive reframing of any idea makes you more accurate at determining whether or not it will work. So that's my homework for you today. So take homes, the barriers to creativity we face are not around our intelligence. They're not around your genius. They're not around who you are as a person at all. Creative personality predicts almost 0% of the variance of what I see in organizational creativity, employees being creative in organizations. So forget about this whole, oh, I'm a creative person, and instead maybe think of it as, how can I help myself engage in more creativity and get out of my thinking rut and recognize that I need to be correct right now, but we are living in a world of uncertainty. COVID-19 has made everything uncertain. It's very hard to know the future when the past has shifted so much. Big data isn't working like it did, right? You did big data before COVID, and now after, how are you going to interpret that data now? It's just, things are very different. So this positive reframing is not just a tool you can use in your life. You can use it with your employees. You can use it with your subordinates. You can use it with your fellow students. And I hope that this has been a helpful exercise for all of you. I'm sorry I spent the last bit talking, but now I'll open it up for any questions that you have.
Jen, while we're waiting for questions, a few things came to mind. First of all, you really demonstrated real-time creativity. When we couldn't get the annotate working, you didn't miss a beat. You just jumped right into like another way to sort of engage our participants today. And I thought that was fantastic. I also thought that, as you said, during these COVID times, I think some people have relied, I have, on venting maybe more. And it didn't occur to me that actually could be destructive to myself. And so positive reframing is really a great tool to learn today. And I want to thank you for that. And then finally, just given the situation that we're in this week, I think your message around thinking creatively about others' ideas, like, as we begin to heal as a nation. So I'm taking this beyond what you were saying, in terms of working within an organization, but even just working within, this country, like to just, maybe think a little more creatively about other people's ideas as a way to better understand. So thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate it. It was really impactful and a great learning for me, as I know with the others that joined, the other participants. Thank you to all the participants. And we will make this recording available tomorrow once it's edited. So you can look forward to that. And Jen, again, thank you so much for sharing with us. This was really terrific.
My pleasure. Be well, all of you. We all need each other right now. It's a difficult time. And I just wish all of you only good and lovely and positive reframing and creative things.